The wind howled through the trees, a relentless force slicing through the thick forest. Emma pulled her coat tighter around her body, her boots crunching over frozen leaves. Then she heard it. A faint, broken whimper carried by the wind. She stopped, heart hammering. It was distant but unmistakable, a cry for help. Her breath formed wisps of white in the cold air as she strained to listen. Another whimper, barely audible. It was coming from deeper within the woods. Without hesitation, Emma pushed forward, her pace quickening. Somewhere in the darkness, something was suffering. As she trudged through the dense undergrowth, Emma's thoughts spiraled. How many animals had she saved? How many had she lost? She had dedicated her life to rescuing the abandoned, the forgotten. But tonight, doubt crept in. Was she truly making a difference? The whimper came again, closer now. There was no time for doubt. Someone needed her. And she wouldn't fail them, not this time. Breaking through a thick patch of tangled branches, Emma gasped. There, beneath the towering trees, a German shepherd stood chained to a tree. His ribs pressed sharply against his thin coat, his body swaying with exhaustion. The chain around his neck was rusted and tight, the ground beneath him worn bare from pacing. Emma's stomach clenched. How long had he been here? Days? Weeks? The dog didn't move, only watching her with weary eyes. Emma swallowed hard. She had to get him out. Emma took a slow step forward. The dog stiffened but didn't growl, didn't bark. There was no aggression, only fear. His hollow eyes locked onto hers, silently begging, "Don't hurt me. Help me." Emma's chest tightened. She had seen that look before, the quiet surrender of an animal who had lost all hope. But he was still standing, still breathing. There was hope left, and Emma would not walk away. She crouched down, voice soft. "Hey, buddy, you're not alone anymore." The dog's ears flicked, his tail giving the faintest twitch, a flicker of trust. Emma reached into her pocket, fingers brushing against a piece of bread she had saved. She held it out, inching closer. If she could just gain his trust, this night wouldn't end in another heartbreak. Rex's body told a story of suffering without ever making a sound. His once proud frame had withered into a frail skeleton, ribs jutting out like a silent cry for help. The rusted chain around his neck was heavy, too tight, and stained with rust where it had eaten into his matted fur. It had been there for too long, long enough to blend into his flesh, as if it had become a part of him. Emma's breath hitched. She had seen neglected animals before, but something about this one felt different. His stillness, his quiet resignation. It was as if he had already accepted his fate. Her eyes swept the small, filthy patch of ground where Rex had been forced to live. The dirt was frozen solid, littered with a few scraps of straw that provided no warmth. Empty food bowls sat overturned in the corner, covered in dust and filled only with dried leaves blown in by the wind. Emma clenched her jaw. How long had he been waiting? Days? Weeks? Longer? Her fingers curled into fists. Neglecting this severely wasn't just careless, it was cruelty. She swallowed the rising anger in her throat and forced herself to focus. Getting upset wouldn't help him. Action would. Slowly, Emma crouched down, her movements careful, deliberate. "Hey, buddy," she murmured, keeping her voice soft. "You're not alone anymore." Rex flinched, his ears flattened, and a deep, warning growl rumbled from his throat. His sunken eyes darted between her and the chain that bound him. Years of betrayal had taught him that humans brought nothing but pain. Emma didn't move any closer. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small piece of jerky. She placed it on the ground and backed away. No sudden movements, no force, just patience. A glint of metal caught Emma's eye. A small battered tag dangled from Rex's collar, its surface scratched and faded. She leaned in slightly, careful not to spook him, and traced the worn-out letters with her eyes. R-E-X. She whispered it, barely audible over the wind. The name felt heavy on her tongue, as if it had been buried beneath years of silence. Rex's ears twitched, his gaze flickering, just for a moment that said he remembered. Emma's fingers shook as she pulled out her phone. Her instincts screamed that time was running out. The line rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Animal control. There's a dog. He's chained up, starving. He needs help now," she pleaded. The response was cold, almost dismissive. "If the owner hasn't surrendered him, there's nothing we can do." Emma's stomach turned. "You're saying he has a right to let this dog die?" "Legally, yes." The line clicked dead. She stared at her phone, stunned. If she didn't act, no one would. The weight of reality crashed down on Emma like an avalanche. If she walked away, Rex might not survive another night. The bitter wind, the gnawing hunger, it would all wear him down until there was nothing left. Her chest tightened. There was no question anymore. She wouldn't let that happen. Emma took a deep breath and met Rex's tired eyes. "I don't care what the law says," she whispered. "I'm getting you out of here." She reached for her multi-tool, her fingers trembling as she set her mind on what needed to be done. Rex had waited long enough. Every morning, Emma returns to the same spot, setting down a bowl of food and fresh water just beyond the reach of Rex's rusted chain. She never forces him to come closer, never speaks too loudly. Just her presence, steady and unwavering, is her silent promise. She isn't here to hurt him. Rex watches from a distance, his sunken eyes filled with uncertainty. Hunger gnaws at his ribs, but caution keeps him frozen. The scars on his body whisper stories of broken trust, of hands that once reached for him only to bring pain. Emma doesn't rush him. She simply sits, watching as the food slowly disappears each day. Small victories, tiny steps toward something neither of them fully understands yet. Days pass, and Emma remains constant. Each time she arrives, she moves a little closer, always careful not to push too hard. She lets him grow used to the sound of her breathing, the rhythm of her voice, as she murmurs soft words into the cold air. Rex doesn't respond, but he also doesn't retreat. That's progress. One afternoon, she places the bowl down and doesn't immediately leave. Instead, she lowers herself onto the ground a few feet away. She stays still, letting him decide what happens next. Minutes pass. Then, as if testing an unspoken agreement, Rex takes his first bite while she's still there. Emma smiles. He's starting to trust. One evening, with the sky painted in fading oranges, something changes. Emma places the food down, as always, but before she can move away, Rex hesitates. His ears flick back, his muscles tense. Then, for the first time, he steps forward. Not much, just a single cautious movement. Emma holds her breath, afraid even the slightest sound will scare him off. He inches closer, eyes locked on hers, searching for any sign of betrayal. Then, he lowers his head and eats. It's small, but to Emma, it feels like a door cracking open, a glimpse of what's possible. The progress is slow, but it's there. Yet, the moment Emma tries to touch the chain around his neck, Rex recoils. His body tenses, his lips curl just enough to warn her. Emma pulls her hand back, guilt twisting in her chest. What have they done to you? Even as trust forms, the wounds of the past remain. He flinches at sudden movements, his body reacting to ghosts she can't see. Emma doesn't blame him. She only sits back, voice gentle. "It's okay, boy. We'll take this one step at a time." Rex doesn't respond. But for the first time, he doesn't turn away either. That night, Emma can't shake the thought that Rex's story isn't over. She spends hours searching local reports, scrolling through pages of forgotten names and abandoned pets. Then, she finds it. A report from 5 years ago. A missing dog, a German shepherd, Rex. Her heart pounds as she reads further. He wasn't just lost, he was stolen. The owner gave up searching long ago, believing him dead. Emma looks at Rex, curled in the dirt, unaware that someone once loved him enough to search. She swallows hard. This dog has been waiting for someone to see him, to bring him home. The first snowfall is only days away, and Rex's body is giving in. His coat is thin, his ribs too sharp beneath his skin. Emma watches him shiver, his legs weak beneath him. She can't keep waiting for him to trust her. The thought sends panic through her. What if he never does? What if she's too late? She clenches her fists, number. She won't let that happen. The cold air bites at her skin, but Emma barely notices. She has to act. Now, the decision is made before the sun even rises. Emma wraps her coat tighter around herself, determination settling deep in her bones. Tonight, she's setting him free. Not in the way he expects. Not by unchaining him and hoping he runs. No, she's taking him, bringing him somewhere safe. Her fingers tighten around the bolt cutters she borrowed. She meets Rex's wary gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. He doesn't trust her yet, but he will. Even if it takes everything in her, she'll show him. He was never meant to live in chains. Emma crouched low behind the rusted fence, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The cold metal of the bolt cutters pressed against her palms, but the real chill came from the fear twisting in her gut. She wasn't just breaking a chain, she was stealing a life from the clutches of cruelty. Rex lay motionless in the dirt, his frail body barely rising with each breath. His ribs protrude through his matted fur, and the heavy chain around his neck glinted under the pale moonlight. Emma clenched her jaw. No more waiting, no more excuses. She tightened her grip on the cutters and stepped forward. With one sharp motion, she positioned the blades over the rusted chain link, bracing herself to sever his last tie to this miserable life. Then, a beam of light slashed through the darkness. Emma froze. The flashlight's glare was blinding, pinning her like a trapped animal. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. "Who's there?" a gruff voice barked. She could hear footsteps crunching on the frost-covered ground, drawing closer. Emma swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. Rex let out a low warning growl. It was the first sound of defiance she'd ever heard from him, but it wasn't enough. The footsteps stopped just a few feet away. The light shifted, revealing a shadowy figure standing in the doorway of the house. Emma's stomach twisted. She wasn't alone anymore. The man stepped forward, his face barely visible under the harsh glow of the flashlight. Emma recognized him instantly, Rex's owner. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he spat, his voice thick with anger. Emma swallowed the lump in her throat. "I'm taking him." The man let out a bitter laugh. "You? Taking my dog? You got some nerve, lady." Rex shrank back, ears pinned against his skull. Emma's hands clenched into fists. "You don't deserve him," she said, her voice low but firm. "He's starving. He's dying out here." The man took a threatening step closer. "And what are you gonna do about it?" Emma didn't move. "I'll call the authorities," she said, her voice steady. The man snorted. "Go ahead. Ain't no law against chaining up a damn dog." Emma's anger boiled over. There is a law against neglect, against abuse. He's covered in wounds. He's barely alive. You can't. Enough, the man snapped. Get off my land before I make you. Emma's pulse hammered. She was outnumbered, outmatched, but she wouldn't leave without Rex. Then the man's hand twitched, and everything changed. The man's arm swung upward, fast and violent, aimed at Rex. Emma barely had time to react before the dog did. With a sudden burst of energy, Rex lunged forward, placing his frail body between Emma and the man. A deep, guttural snarl ripped from his throat. The man stumbled back, shocked. "You little—" But Rex didn't move. His stance was firm, his teeth bared. For the first time, he wasn't cowering, he was protecting. Emma's heart swelled. "Good boy," she whispered. The man's shock quickly turned to rage, but Emma was faster. She reached into her pocket, gripping her phone with shaking fingers. It was time to end this. Emma hit a record. The camera lens framed the scene perfectly. Rex standing his ground, the man looming over him, fists clenched. "Go ahead," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Deny it now." The man's face twisted in fury. "You—" He lunged toward her. Rex barked, stepping forward again. The man hesitated, realizing his mistake. Emma took a step back, still recording. "This is all I need," she said. "You can't hide this anymore." The sound of sirens pierced the night. The man's face was drained of color. Justice had arrived. Red and blue lights flooded the yard as the police car skidded to a stop. Officers emerged, their expressions hard as they took in the scene. Emma, her phone still recording, the trembling but defiant dog, and the man frozen in place. One officer stepped forward. "We've received multiple reports about this address, and now we have proof." The man sputtered, but there was nothing left to say. Minutes later, he was in handcuffs, hauled into the back of the squad car. Emma let out a shaky breath and turned to Rex. "You're safe now," she whispered. For the first time, Rex nudged her hand, his first true sign of trust. Rex lay motionless on the cold steel table at the veterinary clinic, his ribs pressing against his thin coat, his breathing shallow. Emma stood beside him, her heart aching, as the vet examined the extent of his neglect. Malnutrition, infected wounds, years of suffering etched into his frail body. "He's been through hell," the vet murmured, running a gentle hand over Rex's matted fur. "But he's a fighter." Emma clenched her fists. "We'll get him through this." Rex didn't move. He didn't flinch. He had learned that expecting kindness was a mistake. Emma swallowed the lump in her throat. She would show him that this time it was different. The clinic was warm, safe, but to Rex it was just another unfamiliar place filled with strange voices and unknown hands. He flinched at every sound, every sudden movement. The clink of a metal tray sent a shiver through his frail body. Emma sat cross-legged beside his kennel, her voice soft. "It's okay, boy. No one's going to hurt you." Rex stared at her, unblinking. He had heard words like that before, but they had always been lies. His body was here, but his mind was still trapped in the place he had barely escaped. Days turned into weeks, but Emma never left his side. She spent hours by his kennel, whispering to him, reading to him, just letting him know she was there. She never rushed him, never forced him to trust before he was ready. One night, as she gently placed a treat in front of him, Rex hesitated. His eyes darted between Emma and the food, his muscles tense with indecision. Then, cautiously, he took the treat. Emma didn't move, didn't speak, only smiled as he chewed. A small step, but one that meant everything. A week later, it happened. a single moment that made Emma's heart swell. She had just finished reading to him when, as she reached to close the book, she saw it. A slow, hesitant wag of his tail. Barely noticeable, but there. Emma's eyes burned with tears. "You're safe now, Rex." Rex didn't understand the words, but he felt something new, a warmth, a lightness in his chest. For the first time in his life, he allowed himself to believe in kindness. Weeks passed, and Rex grew stronger. His once dull coat had a new shine, his frail body filled out with muscle. But more than that, his spirit began to heal. The day Emma brought him home, he hesitated at the door, his ears twitching as he sniffed the air. He had known only cages, chains, and darkness. Emma knelt beside him. "This is your home now." Rex took a deep breath and stepped inside. The first time Emma let him off the leash, Rex didn't know what to do. He stood in the open field, his body tense, his eyes scanning for walls, barriers, anything that would trap him again. Then Emma gave a gentle nudge. "Go, boy." Rex hesitated. Then, as if something deep within him finally understood, he bolted. His paws pounded the earth, his ears flapping in the wind. He ran, not from fear, but from pure, uncontainable joy. As the sun set, Rex trotted back to Emma, his tongue lolling, his chest heaving with exhilaration. He sat at her feet, lifting his head to meet her gaze. For the first time, his eyes held no fear, only trust, only love. Emma reached out, cupping his face in her hands. "You're home now." Rex leaned into her touch, his tail wagging. He finally understood. He was free, and he was loved. Rex stood by Emma's side, his once weary body now strong, his spirit unrecognizable from the broken soul she had found. He no longer flinched at sudden movements or cowered from an outstretched hand. It had taken time, weeks of patience, whispered reassurances, and gentle touches. But he had learned to trust again. His transformation was living proof that love and patience could mend even the deepest wounds, that no soul was too broken to heal. As Rex lay curled beside her, Emma ran her fingers through his now glossy coat, her heart swelling with quiet gratitude. How close he had been to fading into the shadows, just another forgotten creature on the streets. But now he was home. She thought of all the others. Silent, unseen, waiting for a second chance. No life was insignificant. Every abandoned soul deserved a story worth telling. Emma never expected how deeply Rex would change her. She had rescued him, yet in many ways he had saved her, too. His journey had reignited something inside her, a purpose, a reason to keep going. Kindness, she realized, didn't just transform the one receiving it. It had a ripple effect, touching lives in ways she never imagined. As Rex rested his head on Emma's lap, his amber eyes filled with warmth, she finally understood. This had never just been about saving him. In his quiet resilience, in the way he had fought to trust again, she had found healing too. Their bond wasn't just one of companionship, it was survival. A love that had given them both a reason to believe in new beginnings.